One of the big issues this legislative session, whether Oregon should disconnect from some of the tax cuts in President Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill.
We are aiming to preserve $300 million in revenue to fund health care, education, and public safety.
Oregon Senator Anthony Broadman of Bend, chair of the Senate Finance Committee, says the president's bill rips nearly $900 million out of the state's budget. He and Representative Nancy Nathanson of Eugene, chair of the House Revenue Committee, both Democrats, are proposing Senate Bill 1507, the so-called disconnect bill. Among other provisions, it would substantially increase the income tax credit for low to moderate income families, establish a $25 million tax credit for Oregon small businesses that create jobs, disallow the new federal deduction for interest on auto loans, disconnects from an exclusion that protects a portion of capital gains, and also disconnects from accelerated depreciation for machinery and equipment.
These affordability investments for working Oregonians are made possible by closing tax loopholes for the super wealthy and big out-of-state corporations, which Representative Nathanson.
Not everyone agrees with this approach, though. Angela Wilhelms is CEO and president of Oregon Business and Industry, one of the state's business lobbies. Welcome to Eye on Northwest Politics.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
Well, first of all, what are your major objections to Senate Bill 1507?
Well, I think it's really important we start with a few facts. One, the state economist came out with a revenue forecast just this past Wednesday, this week, that shows the general fund for this state is going to have an ending balance of $200 million. That's the fund that legislators use for things like education, public safety. So the idea that we even need to raise revenue is just antithetical to what the numbers that the state economist himself are presenting. Second of all, there are provisions in here that are being touted as these quote-unquote corporate loopholes, and yet we haven't been given any examples of how these, big out-of-state or whatever they want to call them corporations are using them. In fact, we sent out a statement the other day with local food processors and agriculture, farms, family farms and businesses in that space, as well as some local small to mid-sized manufacturers. Those are the companies directly affected by rolling back these provisions. These are not loopholes. Bonus depreciation, for example, is a timing issue about when a company can expense something for tax treatment. It's timing. It's not about the net amount that the general fund is going to get. That's money that those small and mid-sized businesses in Oregon can use to invest in capital equipment that allows them to grow their business, that allows them to create more jobs, to invest more in their workers, their communities, and their company, which is exactly what this state needs right now.
Legislative leaders say between the tax cuts and the cuts in federal funding, Oregon could lose $1.2 billion over the next biennium. They say that's money that could help fund everything from food assistance to education and public safety. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple things to keep in mind here. The state budget is really comprised of a couple of major buckets. There's the general fund budget, which is what income tax, business tax, other things pay into. There's other funds, and there's federal funds. A lot of those cuts and reduction in fundings you're talking about are on the federal fund side. And I don't discount the fact that legislators have hard decisions to make. But what they cannot do is perpetuate an unsustainable total budget by putting that on the backs of small and mid-sized businesses and on the backs of individual Oregonians by shifting costs to the general fund. And that's what this disconnect provision will do. The state budget, Ken, has doubled in the last 10 years. I don't know many businesses or households that have seen their budget double in the last 10 years. So I think it's time we have a real difficult, admittedly, but important conversation about the sustainability of that going forward, because we're not on a path where we can keep pace, especially while we're in a situation where businesses are closing, they're cutting jobs, we're losing private sector employment year over year. And don't forget, that is the basis for Oregon's income tax-based budget system.
Governor Kotek just named an Economic Prosperity Council, named former Republican State Senator Tim Knopp as the chief prosperity officer. What do you think about the concept of a prosperity council, and what do you think about how it's been organized so far?
Look, we are so grateful that the governor and a handful of other legislators and policy leaders in this state are finally talking about the things we've been saying for years, that Oregonians have known for years. We need to focus on making this a place that's open for business so that we can create jobs and get people to work. We have the third highest unemployment in the nation right now. Our GDP is growing slower than the rest of the country. And only 26% of Oregonians think we're on the right track. We've got to do some things differently, and we think economically focused policies are a huge part of that. We also tend to be a little frustrated, admittedly, when we continue what Oregon has been pretty good at, which is studying and looking and councils and committees. We know what we need to do to put people back to work. We know what we need to do to help local businesses grow and survive and thrive. We know what we need to do to recruit other businesses in a competitive environment. Having said that, we look forward to seeing what the council puts forward. I think June 30 is when their reports due. My understanding is we'll have a collection of ideas that are both executive branch actions, legislative branch actions. OBI will be putting forward its own recommendations, and we encourage people to participate in feeding information into that council, because we got to start taking action.
You do have a couple of bills that you're supporting in this session. One would expand the urban growth boundary in Hillsborough. The other deals with unsanctioned public camping. Why those issues?
Well, we have a number of things we're working on, but thank you for bringing up those. First, I want to thank Senator Janine Solomon from the Washington County area for the Jobs Act. That's the first bill you mentioned. It does multiple things in the economic development space to spur growth. It also, for example, expands an R&D tax credit, which is a competitive tool most states use, and ours is frankly embarrassing when you look at it from a competitive landscape. So she's really digging into those issues, and I encourage people to look at that bill and support that bill. We're really excited about the opportunity for economic development in the Jobs Act.
Do you know that bill number?
I believe it's 1586. My team will probably text me immediately
We'll figure it out.
Apologies.
And we've got about 30 seconds here, so talk about
the
the
Local
other bill.
Control and Safety Act is really very simple. In 2021, Oregon passed a law. It was House Bill 3115 that then was meant to comply with then current legal standards. Those legal standards have been overturned. They're no longer applicable. This was a Supreme Court case on the national level won by the city of Grants Pass. And now, unfortunately, the city of Grants Pass and other cities in Oregon are at a disadvantage because we've taken away their ability to have local control around how they want to enforce camping ordinances in their communities.
And
this would simply modernize that to align with current federal law and allow those cities to make the decision that's best for them. If they want to have tighter restrictions, that's up to them. This is about local control, and it's about public safety for small businesses, main streets, and the people that want to enjoy the parks and sidewalks in their community.
Angela Wilhelms, we have to end it there. Thank you very much for being on Eye on Northwest Politics.
Thank you for having me.